Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Piss. This is a frontline update for the 3rd of March 2025, Ukraine war frontline, obviously. I am doing this now because I didn't mean to do this, but I was going to just not quickly do my geopolitical update because it's a huge undertaking and I was just getting so angry with the state of affairs, and I must stay positive, right? So I thought I'd do the frontline update, see how that is going. And it's a bit of a mixed bag of nuts, which, in all honesty, is fairly good for Ukraine, given that we're on the back of a long period of Russian continued territorial gains. There are still territorial gains, but the Ukrainians are pushing back in a couple of places, at the very least. So we're going to go up to Kupyansk. No, we will go to Kupyansk. We're going to go to the Kursk area, where it is a little bit challenging for the Ukrainians, as according to both the mappers here. And actually, I saw this today, and I was wondering if this is pretty accurate reflection of what's going on. That the Russians are really trying to push back in Kursk. This is Kriegsforscher, who is up there. I think he might be part of some drone unit up there, but he is fighting in the Kursk region, keeps posting sort of what they have done, is very proud of having taken out huge amounts of equipment up there. But then, pointing back to this Nalcio set of stats, which I previously reported to you, saying that actually the Russians have slightly fewer losses than the Ukrainians, so it's showing that the Ukrainians are probably attacking quite a bit there, but it's 6 of one, half dozen the other, essentially. And he's saying, look, since the first day of the operation, I was publicly strongly against this operation. So this is one of the fighters saying actually he's against the operation, despite the fact I took part in this operation, and it really increased my morale. It's not about personal emotions, it's about resources, and numbers are definitely not on our side. And he then shows that stats there. To which someone else says, the considerations are beyond tactical. Kursk shows Russia's red lines are BS. It also has enabled Ukraine to use certain Western weapons on Russian soil, and it's also showed Russians are not as strong as the propaganda portrays them. And he says, Kursk operation definitely reached its political gains. In other words, it succeeded politically. The question is now going to be, is it worth keeping hold of that and putting in resources to keep hold of Kursk? And, what are the gains still going to be realized, etc., etc. So that's interesting coming from someone who is either there or was there, talking about whether it is time to cut your losses there. I think that's the inference, because look, the Russians are pushing back in a way that we haven't seen to this degree previously, right? So this is I forget how many days since my last update on the front line. It was the 27th. So this is like a 5-day update. So expect quite a bit of change, considering it's a 5-day update, but we haven't seen this kind of change in the area previously. Now, although Andrew Perpetua is arguing that actually some of this area up here is not under Russian control, either the Ukrainians are pushed back or there's a bit of rejigging, there is a lot of area here that both mappers say is under Russian control, and that's in the Malaya Lokhnia area. So they've really pushed. This is the area they're trying to keep hold of and stop the Russians from attacking from the north down to Malaya Novosilka and from the west across to that settlement, but to keep hold of this area here. But they seem to have lost that area, and so the Russians are definitely putting an awful lot of pressure on, particularly the western side of that sector, and that is that's going to cause the Ukrainians a real headache as to what they should do with Kursk. So that is to start off on a bit of a negative note. Coming on to Kharkiv, no change there. Then we come to a positive note for the Ukrainians in that, and you can see large number of blue pins here. Remember, the dark blue pins signify where Suryat maps had the Russian defensive line. So they said the Russians were controlling all of this area down to there, very close to Kupyansk city, and between Sienkiewka and Kupyansk. But they've now been pushed back to this orange line. So that's what the dark blue pins suggest. And that it might have even gained, or it's probably just a bit rejigging there. Bit of a glitch. And then Andrew Perpetua had the Russians all the way over here. And then has pushed the Russians back to there. So taking both of them, suggesting that there are gains for the Ukrainians south southwest of Sienkiewka here. We go to one of my sources here, Jan Kiev, just saying Russians are down to only advancing an average of 5 square kilometers per day, and Ukrainian forces just gained 4.14 square kilometers, pushing the Russians back near Kupyansk, entering the northwestern outskirts of Petropavlovka. This is Kharkiv region. We may be nearing a net zero gain situation despite Russian assaults ongoing. If the West just gives Ukraine what it needs now, the tide can turn, and that's a frustration about the situation with the United States. So there's Petropavlovka, and if they are going to stop arms, aid and assistance coming to Ukraine, that's exactly the wrong time. It's never the right time. Grayskull then says Ukrainian channel reported that the AFU pushed the Russian forces back north of Petropavlovka, and that is again in that area we're talking about. That Sienkiewka there, where there are claims that they're fighting pretty much almost at the outskirts there. North of Kupyansk, says no reports, Ukrainian forces are confirmed to have carried out offensive operations. They've regained a significant portion of land and reached almost Sienkiewka again. Fighting is ongoing and the Ukrainians are trying to push deeper. So Sienkiewka up there, they're really pushing on a grey zone around those two forest area bits there. So here we have Sienkiewka, grey zone around here is what no reports are suggesting that the Russians are back. Actually, Andrew Perpetua has them further back, I think, than no reports possibly. No, it's just completely different really. No reports has the line coming down here. So anyway, either way, Ukrainians doing a good job of countering in that area. Then when we come down to the Pishchani sector, Russians making some small gains, just a couple of fields really, or a bit of forestry around the railway line there by this water feature, and then a tree there just around Krylyakivka there. Okay, so otherwise fairly quiet until we get down to the Terny-Torska area, where around Yampolivka the Russians, according to Surat maps, have made some fairly significant gains. Well, filled in a bit of a weird gap there. Nothing too serious, though, to be fair. Now, this is where it gets a little bit worrying. If the Ukrainians are under pressure around Bilo Horevka, this is one of these keystone sectors where if this is all lost, then that gives the Russians the ability to get to Seversk, march along the river further and through the forest. And so, this is really key. The Ukrainians need to hold on to this. And Andrew Perpetua saying, actually, yeah, just around that area, there is more land under the Russian control than previously thought, whether that is as a result of activity or kind of catching up with what Surat Maps has said, which is very different in this area. This is one of the areas of the front line where they have a vastly different understanding of what is going on there. And that goes right the way down this whole Cvesque front line, where the differences are pretty significant for the two mappers. Andrew Perpetua's blue line has the Russians much further to the east than Surat maps. And then relatively quiet along the Seversk front, or very quiet in terms of map changes. Some gains for the Ukrainians in the Chesivyar area. Andrew Perpetua already had this. Grayskull talks about Ukrainians reclaiming the western part of Chesivyar. That's the major settlement part in the north of the town. So that's good news. And the Ukrainians are pushing back there. Although in the kind of central part and to the south of the town, according to Surat maps, the Russians still pushing on there. So it's kind of 6 of one, half a dozen of the other there. They have made these advances along the T0504 highway towards Konstantinivka, going through Stupochki. So watch out for Stupochki. There's going to be, I think, a fight on for them there. Then this is where we get to the area that is the best for the Ukrainians at the moment, and that's Turetsk, where they are pushing back. A lot of fighting going on there. No changes for Andrew Perpetua, interestingly, here, although he had already made some of these changes. You can see that actually he's got the Russians not in control of this whole area. If I don't know if I can do it in... I can. So if I was to deselect Surat maps there, you'd see that actually the Russian defensive line looks very contrived and sort of, up and down there. Whereas if we were to look at the Surat Map's defensive line, it looks very, very different, right? The reality is going to be that Andrew Perpetua's is more correct here, because that's what most of the other sources are saying. But Surat Maps is taking the Russian defensive line back in a number of places, including down here, south, on the western edges, and north of Turetsk as well. So quite a few sources to go through, and I talked you through these last time. Here are some changes around the Dachny area. Now, where that is over here. So there's Dachny, and you've got this railway line. As it comes down there, it goes down that corner, and it's right by that corner of the railway, that bend in the railway, where the Ukrainians have pushed back there. And in fact, the grey zone is much further to the south, according to Grayskull. So he actually doesn't have the Russians in control of any of that area there. So that's a pretty significant difference, and also a change too, because the Ukrainians are pushing there. But they're actually pushing all along here, further parts of Turetsk, that's in the north. And then we've got a large area to the northwest. So that is over basically here, where the Ukrainians are pushing back an awful lot. So over there, actually further to the east there, really, that's all of this area. And then we have, so center, the armed forces of Ukraine broke into the center of Turetsk and recaptured a number of other positions in the city. And then moving from the south as well, central Turetsk is moving from grey zone to being back under Ukrainian control, about 500 meters left to close the cauldron. And that is talking about cutting off the Russians here by attacking in the south and the north, closing off the cauldron and capturing them in that area, maybe encircling them. And that could be a bit of a disaster for the Russians. As you can see, if you cut them off by coming north and south, then the Russians will lose quite a lot of troops in that area, and that would be really challenging for them. Russians are not withdrawing from northwest Turetsk, risk being isolated and having withdrawal routes cut off soon, says Grayskull, talking about that particular problem there. Now, the Ukrainian armed forces are actively advancing in Turetsk, reclaiming key positions. Fighting continues in the city centre, and the enemy is losing control. There are reports of complete encirclement of Russian occupiers in several areas. And there you go. There's one mapping interpretation that we just seen. That's kind of the Grayskull one, and another one there. Russians are running out of basic equipment in some areas. Using horses and pack mules is not a good sign. Well, yeah, generally speaking, no. There were claims that Chris Owicki did a thread on this that I shared with you this morning that suggested that part of the problem here for the Russians was that they were claiming that they had taken Turetsk really more than they actually had in real life in order to appease commanders up the chain. And this has come back and bit them on the arse as apparently they are not in control. I would say that goes only so far. There's definitely counter activity going on here, counterattacks from the Ukrainians, and it may well be the Russians didn't really have robust control. They said they did. They sent those reports to up the chain of command, but reality on the ground was that it was fairly tenuous, their control over Turetsk, and they were easily overturned potentially. And then another little bit taken back even since those other maps, the Grayskull reporting that, just to let you know where that is, that sort of this area there is being reported. So really, quite consistent strides into Turetsk. Ukrainian forces, says Tendar, have punched deep holes into Russian defences in Turetsk and re-entered into large parts of the city. They have already entered the ruins of the city centre. So that's your good news for the Ukrainians there, and that's been fairly consistent. Okay, then when we come down, we can see that there's not a lot of change to the northern Prokrosk front, and in fact around Prokrosk exceptionally quiet, all things considered. Andrew Perpetua has Pishchani back under Russian control, so that's a shame there. They've been fighting over that. And then most mappers other than Surat Maps has Kotelina under the Ukrainian control, that the Russians be pushed back to the other side of the railway line. They are yet to acknowledge that, but most other reporting from Ukraine has done a video on that yesterday, detailing the changes there. Forget these ones over there, that's a glitch. We have some small gains for the Russians around the, where are we, halfway between Krakow area, although Krakow's all the way back there. I mean, it just goes to show how much land the Russians did take in that advance. But halfway down to there, they've taken a few more fields and whatnot, but no changes to the Krakow area in 5 days. So that is significant. And then some fairly consistent changes still taking place around Vlika Novosilka, now to the northwest of Vlika Novosilka, as the Russians are sort of moving through those villages, a few villages and fields in that general area. So it's a mixed bag of nuts in terms of pins. The ratio of pins is Russian pins 2 to Ukrainian 1. So Ukrainians are pushing back, and a third of the gains, if you can take it from there, are Ukrainian gains, and then 2/3 of them are Russian gains. But in terms of land and slowing down, we saw some data this morning that the intensity has really dropped, and actually the Russians are making the slowest progress that they have since June of 2024. That is all good news for the Ukrainians. The Russians appear to be culminating to at least some degree, and in some areas, maybe not all of the areas, but certainly some of them. I wonder whether they're just really thinking now about taking back Kursk and piling in North Koreans. We've got some North Korean reinforcements there, and I said, we should not dismiss North Koreans. They will cause problems for the Ukrainians. They will cause attrition of Ukrainian personnel and equipment. And that's probably what we're seeing there. The Ukrainians done a really good job to hold onto Kursk. I guess the question is going to be at what cost? And whether they can do anything to attrit the Russians and hold on without causing too much attrition to their own forces. So that's enough from me. Hopefully that was of use. Thank you for watching. Please take care, and I'll speak to you soon. Toolpips.